Sure. So Brazil is the world's fourth largest exporter of small arms and ammunition. It's among the top 20 largest arms producers of all types, including aircraft, vessels, vehicles, missiles. I think the key point to mention here is that Brazil's exports for both conventional weapons and small arms and light weapons has increased pretty dramatically over the last 10 years. The U.S. is Brazil's biggest client for small arms and ammunition. In the past 10 years, the U.S. imported about $1 billion worth of weapons from Brazil. Other countries like Europe, and in Europe, like the UK and Germany and Belgium, are also high on the list. A key point, which I think a lot of your viewers won't know, is that Brazil's exported a lot of weapons, including small arms, light weapons, and ammunition, to the Middle East in the past decade, particularly countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman. And that it goes without saying that Brazil also exports across Asia and Africa. The key point here is that Brazil is quite a significant player, having exported to over 100 countries around the world. Its total sales were roughly 150 million a year in the last 5 years. And I think another key point to mention is that Brazil has yet to sign the ATT, ratify the ATT. Brazil signed the ATT in 2013, but it's been languishing for ratification in Congress for the last 4 years, largely due to significant domestic opposition. Brazil's mired right now in its worst political, economic, and social crisis in a generation. So I think you could say the Brazilians are a bit distracted right now. They're not particularly observant of what's happening globally. I think they're dimly aware of a Trump presidency, to be honest. And traditionally, if you look at historically, Brazil's adopted quite an oppositional position to the United States. It sees itself as a kind of foil for the global South, as it were. And this was amplified in the last 10 to 15 years and reached a real critical peak in 2013 with the NSA scandal that broke and news that the then President Dilma was being wiretapped by a number of intelligence agencies, including in the United States. So in spite of that, in the last couple of years, given the political and economic crisis, Brazil's been quite restrained in its criticism of the U.S. It's preferred to keep quite a low profile on a range of issues, including issues of arms exports. What I think you're seeing is Brazil actually trying to rebuild its relationship with the United States, both economically and politically, quite quietly, maybe perhaps even below the radar. To the extent that Brazil has any position or perception of the United States exports under the current Trump administration, you could say that they're watching very closely. The Ministry of External Relations, our equivalent of Foreign Affairs here, and the Ministry of Defense are very aware that Trump is likely to outstrip Obama in terms of arms exports in his term. The document that was produced on foreign military sales and notifications in the first 100 days are a useful signal, and you better believe the Brazilian authorities are reading those signals very closely. I think Brazil will see this increased export drive by the United States as a form of competition, and it's already taken measures to ramp up its own exports in response to the United States. The Ministry of External Relations just issued a memo to all of the embassies around the world, the Brazilian embassies, requesting that diplomats actively ramp up sales and exports of all range of conventional weapons, including, by the way, cluster munitions. So I think Brazil, on the one hand, will be looking to solidify and consolidate where it can its relationship with the United States after a decade and a half of, let's say, antagonism, but at the same time, we'll read into the drive to increase exports with some degree of trepidation, and will likely look to ramp up its own exports. Sure. I think there are many red flashing lights ahead. The U.S. is clearly ramping up its military involvement in the Middle East since Trump came into office. The Middle East is also a major market for Brazil. And there's a long history of Brazilian exports to Gulf states, not just of conventional arms, airplanes, ships, and missiles, but also cluster munitions, small arms, light weapons, and parts, as well as non-lethal weaponry. And so what we're seeing increasingly are weapons that were made in Brazil turning up in many of the hot spots across the Middle East. Most recently in Yemen, there have been 3 reported cases of Brazilian weaponry, including cluster munitions turning up in Yemen, and some of them being involved in the killing of civilians. And so Brazil's come under heavy criticism. But given the amount of political crisis and economic crisis in the country, it hasn't really had much of a dent, frankly, on public opinion or on government policy. And to the contrary, what we're seeing is Brazil relaxing many of its constraints on weapons sales to countries like Saudi Arabia, at the same time as the U.S. is lifting its restraints, human rights restraints, in terms of arms exports to countries like Bahrain. Neither Brazil nor the United States appear to be prioritizing human rights when thinking about their exports of weapons. Nor is Brazil looking likely that it will ratify the Arms Trade Treaty, much less the 2008 Convention on Cluster Munitions. And this is having a diplomatic fallout for Brazil. It's resulting in, let's call it, a lessening of Brazilian legitimacy in the UN, as well as it's being excluded from a number of the major discussions on disarmament treaties. So I think we can be somewhat concerned about the future path ahead. Yeah, I think all of us around the world, including here in Brazil, are watching both words and deeds coming out of Washington. And it's extremely difficult to configure one's foreign policy in response to what is apparently a foreign policy based on unpredictability. Having said that, I think our advice from Brazil would be choose your words very carefully. That is, I mean to say, the executive must choose its words very carefully. What the U.S. says and does still matters, even in the age, in fact, even more so in the age of Trump than ever before. And this includes with respect to one's direction on arms exports and imports. What the U.S. does still matters and will fundamentally influence the behavior and postures taken by other states, including big countries like Brazil. It's very likely that the U.S. will withdraw from the ATT. This will probably have knock-on effects. Well, it will have knock-on effects, won't probably have knock-on effects. And it will certainly have effects down here in Brazil, where ratification of the ATT was on the table and is increasingly being taken off the table by a relatively small group of well-paid members of Congress, well-paid as in well-paid by the arms industries here, who have been agitating for Brazil to remove itself from the ATT process. They call themselves colorfully the Bullets, Bibles, and Beef Caucus. And they are increasingly adopting much of the discourse, both internationally and domestically, that we're seeing in the United States when it comes to the pro-arms positions. So Brazilian arms manufacturers, Brazilian members of Congress, and Brazilian citizens, in spite of all the distractions down here, are watching the signals that are coming out of Washington. And it's going to be very important that the United States recognizes that they still have that leadership role. It does raise a question. I mean, if the United States is not going to apply and adhere to human rights criteria when considering its foreign military sales, I guess the question is, what are other countries expected to do?